Welcome to part 2 of Therian. I'm Colleen McKnight, and I hope you enjoy the story. Monday, 11:47 a.m. Agent Chloe Sakata waited patiently for Mallory to outline the details of the case. Detective Mallory took longer than he intended to explain them, due to lack of sleep, and also the fact that Agent Sakata was albino. Mallory tried not to stare at her pale appearance, and for her part, she did not acknowledge his discomfort or show any sign of her own. He concluded by bringing out the totem and naming Ronan Pritchard as their prime suspect. Sakata carefully traced her finger over a dried leather strap tied through the deer skull. Ronan Pritchard did not make this. Mallory frowned. How can you know that? The edges of the leather are uneven. The maker likely cut them himself, and look how closely he wound them, how tight the knots are. This was made by a violent man. She picked up the tablet and froze the video on Pritchard's face as he hid under the table. Pritchard is afraid. He's hiding. Mallory pressed play as the video swept across the room. What about the deer antlers all over his walls? Sakata shook her head. Those were placed with respect to honor the deer. He lives with them as part of his home. It's a reflection of his life. She picked up the photograph of the catacomb. This place is hidden, not meant to be seen or disturbed. This shrine is a representation of death. The detective took a moment to push down his frustration. He pulled out a printout of a map. Pritchard's home is here. A line has been drawn from the house to the shrine. The shrine is here. That's just under 2 miles, an easy walk through the woods. Another line had been drawn from the shrine to Calum's neighborhood. This is nearly the same distance. He looked at the agent. I have a boy who stumbled across this horror show in the woods and dragged this thing out of the cave full of deer skulls, and a short distance away, I have an outcast who lives in a broke-down house with deer horns all over his walls. His pulse was pounding. Our therapist believes that these two met in the woods, and I don't need to tell you how the story ends. Mallory stared the young agent in her eyes. She met his eyes with an expression that was halfway between patience and pity. This story ends with an innocent man incarcerated, a boy unprotected, and a very violent individual on the loose who has likely just begun down a terrible path. Look here. His eyes followed as she pointed. This line between Pritchard's and Calum's is almost straight, almost equidistant. Mallory was confused. So? Sakata scrolled on her phone until she found an image and held it up. It took Mallory a moment to realize what he was looking at. Is that? Yes. It's a homemade mask, a hood, really, made with a deer skull and antlers. There were differences, but resemblance to the effigy was unmistakable. Urgency flooded into Mallory's voice. Where is this from? Australia. Mallory deflated. He was tired and losing patience with Sakata. He replied sarcastically, Seems like too far of a commute for our guy. She ignored him and continued. There's a term, antipode. It describes opposite points. She pointed to the map that showed the houses in the shrine. These points are antipodal. Now, if you draw a line from this town through the center of the earth, it comes very close to connecting you to this town in Australia, the town where this mask is from. Chloe looked at Mallory. There is another term, genius loci. It's Latin for the spirit of a place. One of my areas of focus is profiling crimes based on locations and not just people. Mallory was confused. Is that a thing? She stared at him with no emotion and said, Yes. He took a moment, but was still confused. Okay, how does this help us? Chloe slowly nodded. It tells us that we need to be looking for a man who is disagreeable and is probably becoming more so. Maybe not a loner, but he doesn't socialize well. He probably abuses drugs or alcohol and is known to disappear for days at a time. Mallory lifted an eyebrow. That might take a while. You just described half the guys in this country. Our man won't be hard to find. How is that? Because people will be scared of him. In the hours that followed, Mallory and Cicada combed through local reports of domestic abuse, bar fights, and disorderly conduct. It was late and nothing stood out so far. Something is bugging me. Mallory rifled through a stack of papers until he found what he was looking for. Maybe it can narrow our search. I came across a description of people that relate to animals. They call themselves Therians. Both Mark Callum and Ronan Pritchard have a thing for deer, and our suspect is obviously infatuated as well. Maybe we should be looking for someone that works with deer. Maybe the Department of Natural Resources or a wildlife specialist or something. No, none of these men is Therian. You know that? Yes. She paused for a moment before answering. Because I am. Mallory's face dropped. You're a Therian? Chloe looked at him in the eyes. Yes. Is that why you're here? I mean, are you or do you relate to deer? No, my animal is a barn owl. He took a deep breath as he tried to understand. Does this help you to profile? She shook her head. No, not directly, but it does act as a reminder that not everything is cut and dry. There are a great many things that we don't understand, and that sometimes when we're faced with things we're not sure what to do with, it helps to keep an open mind. He tried to take in what she was telling him, but his thoughts were slippery and upsetting. If it doesn't really pertain to our case, why are you telling me this? She replied without challenge. You brought it up, and now I need to know how you are going to handle it. She gave him a moment and added, I want to know if you can deal with things that you don't understand, because there is a high chance that this is all about to go very badly. As if on cue, an officer burst through the door. Detective! We have shots fired at the Callums. Just as quickly, the officer bolted out and ran towards the garage as the entire department began scrambling. Monday, 10:33 p.m. Jen Callum was working in bed when she jolted at the sound of a man screaming outside. She immediately ran to Mark's room, but the boy wasn't there. She dropped to the floor, but he wasn't under the bed. The screaming intensified, and she ran to grab the .45 from her nightstand. Throwing the front door open, she burst outside, but the sight in the streetlights stopped her cold. Mark was on the ground, one hand up to shield himself. A disheveled young man was defending Mark from a giant, bearded man with an insane expression, raising a large wooden club with a deer horn at the end and screaming, The Deer King chose me! Leonard Gandering stood behind the man, grinning in his pajamas. Jen snapped. She raised her gun and fired. The tall man spun and went down. Shocked silence followed as the others stared, open-mouthed, as Jen rushed to her son. Mark! The boy held his arm up, and she hoisted him to his feet with one hand, gun still raised in the other. There was blood across his face where he'd been struck, and her mind was reeling. The disheveled man was silent, chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Gandering looked confused, like he didn't know where he was. The tall man groaned and used his good arm to push himself up to one knee. He reached to pick up the club. You stay the fuck down! Jen Callum's voice let no doubt as to her sincerity or intention. The man leered at her with a maniacal expression and climbed to his feet. There was no hesitation as Jen fired and then fired again. Tuesday, 1:26 p.m. Mallory stared at his coffee. You were right. Pritchard was never our man. Chloe shrugged. We're just lucky it turned out the way that it did. If Mark Callum hadn't removed the totem from the shrine, Trevor Brandeis likely would have continued down the road of insanity until he started killing. Mallory understood so little of everything that had happened. Why? What makes a person do that? She considered how to answer. I can't say exactly. I have a theory about energies, places, and people that are more susceptible to suggestion than others. Maybe it's outside influence, maybe not. I don't know. You know something. You saw it coming. Some of the evidence fit into a profile I considered. That's a far cry from knowing. A chill dropped over Mallory. Australia? Chloe's face was empty of expression. The mask I showed you was found at the crime scene. The man that wore it had just killed his third victim when a random person came along and surprised him. He lost the mask as he ran away. Mallory chilled further. They didn't catch him? Chloe shook her head. Not yet. When did this happen? 5 days ago. Mallory took a deep breath. You think that these cases are related? Chloe sighed. Maybe. Like I said, I keep an open mind. Mallory searched for the right thing to say. The profile you developed was a near exact match for Trevor Brandeis. We would have found him within weeks, if not days. That has to make you happy. She stared into the distance, looking at nothing. Maybe, but if not for Ronan Pritchard, Mark Calum would be dead right now. Luck won't save us every time. She brought her stare back to Mallory. And I've lost the chance to learn from Trevor Brandeis. Now I won't find out why he built a shrine in the woods, or who the Deer King is. I will interview everyone that I met in the street last night, but I doubt they'll know. She considered her next words carefully. I hope to learn more about what connects them and why the deer are important. These things might defy rational explanation, but I try to let myself see what's there instead of what's supposed to be there. Hopefully, I'll get a little closer to an answer in time to help the Australians. When I do understand it all and can predict it, then I'll be happy. Mallory nodded slowly as he understood. That's a lot to ask of yourself. Chloe nodded slowly. That's my job, and it's who I am. She sipped her tea. I think it's who you are as well. Mallory was beset by a mix of feelings, but Chloe did not wait for him to respond before continuing. The Australian police call him the Deer Man. Detective Seth Mallory knew he was being pushed. He just didn't understand why. His insecurity wrestled with his pride, confusion blinding him save for the burning admission that this agent, with 20 years less experience, had outthought, outpredicted, and ultimately outdone his police work, leaving him at a loss for why she was pressing him now. The expression on his face said as much. Chloe had expected that and spoke in a clear and serious tone. Your first instinct was to protect Mark. Your police work was driven by that instinct, and even though you started with the wrong suspect, you would have quickly realized that and moved on. Your research reflected a true desire to solve the case, and in time you would have. My advantage is that I've received more training, but now, so have you. You spoke before of hooded animal traditions and a spirit that Mark was afraid of, the Wendigo. It has been my experience that most detectives shy away from evidence in that direction, but you considered it. She gave that a moment to settle before producing a small drive and setting it on the table. Speaking in a quiet voice, she said, You and I currently stand as the two people on this planet who are uniquely qualified to assist with this case, and they do need help. Help me catch this killer. This concludes the story, Therian. I'm Colleen McKnight, and thank you for listening.